record button. This meeting is being recorded and we will be posting it to the county project website. We've had a lot of questions, about 57 pages of questions that we received on Saturday. So very important questions, lots of questions about safety and security and the fire station and housing and impacts to the community. And we obviously, in over an hour and a half, we're not able to get to all of the questions, but we are going through those. We will be posting those to the county website as a Q&A in the FAQ. Kamala, thank you for posting the agenda. So a little bit about this evening's meeting and what we're going to be doing. Supervisor Stork is going to be going through an overview of the project at the beginning. We have Assistant Fire Chief Tom Arnold that's going to be here to talk about the existing station, the new station, and what co-location means for the fire department. Tom Fleetwood is the Director of Fairfax County Department of Housing and Community Development, and he's going to talk about the county's approach to housing across Fairfax. And Tom Barnett is also here from the Office to Prevent and End Homelessness and can answer questions about the county's approaches to our homeless population. Carrie Needham is the Director of Building and Design and Construction Division, and he's responsible for capital projects across the county. And then we also have Danilo Nunez, who is on his team that will be joining us. He's going to spend about 5 minutes doing a project and process overview, and then we will spend the rest of our time going through community Q&A. I do want to mention that with so many folks on the call, that we will be doing questions in the chat section. And so I would ask, based on what we saw on Saturday, if you can hold your questions until we get to that portion of the meeting. There were a lot of questions that were answered at the beginning of the meeting that folks went through during their presentations, but there was so much chat going on in the chat box that I know it was hard to keep track of all of that. So we'd ask that you would hold on to those, and we will get to as many questions as possible. The other thing that I want to mention is this is our second virtual meeting. And as the governor continues to lessen the COVID restrictions, we are planning to have community meetings out in public as well, out in the communities, and we'll continue to do virtual meetings as well. So I just wanted to mention that. And then I'd like to introduce our supervisor, Dan Stork, and he will be doing a welcome and overview. And I will also remind folks, if you would please keep your comments in the chat kind and respectful. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you all very much for being here tonight. The second of what I've been saying and will continue to say will be many public engagements. We are at the very beginning of the process. I know for some it feels like that's not the case, but it is very much the case. Staff has put together their review of this, of a number of things, and they're going to be presenting tonight what their current recommendations are about the Beacon Hill property, the former Highville Valley Nursery. And this conversation really is about that particular piece of property. But there's two other things that clearly are impacting that. One is that we have a fire station that needs to be enlarged. And in this case, now we're looking to move it. And we also have a piece of ground. And again, staff is going to go through this in far more detail than I would, where they are recommending some other uses, and particular housing, and then the kind of housing, whether it's emergency housing, supportive housing, or affordable housing, or even what we would call workforce housing. Those are all the range of things that this particular property is being considered for. So again, you'll be hearing that tonight. We are truly starting this process. Dan Stork, me, the supervisor, I have made no decision about any of this stuff. I've not decided to support this option or that option. Staff is presenting this. I've been willing to kind of go through the process because it is an important community engagement one, of which we ultimately have to find solutions to some of the issues that they're bringing forward of this. Number one, solution to fire station location, but also a solution to replace what is frankly, a decrepit and not in a very good place, the Kennedy shelter. So those are the key issues. I know for most of you, you're focused on the emergency housing, the shelter, and what happens or what doesn't happen with that. But for the county overall, and ultimately for this property and for my support, is looking at all the different things that county staff is recommending or wanting to be considered for this. And as I guess we'll say, and I'll keep saying, I will have plenty of other meetings. I think I said on Saturday there'll be dozens of other meetings. I will be there at probably the vast majority of them, and we'll be listening in person or remote, either way, whatever folks are wanting. But that's what I do. If you don't get a chance to get your questions answered tonight, or you don't get a chance to speak tonight, there will be other opportunities, and I assure you that I will be there for other opportunities. So I'm going to be there. We will have that deep, rich, full conversation. In the end, we'll see if we can find something that the community can support. And in the end, we know we have to do something to address these issues that we have in front of us with the fire station and the shelter. So you're going to hear more again from everybody about that. A couple things I guess I would ask you to keep in mind, because they're absolutely in my mind, is that we're here to listen. I know listening doesn't necessarily mean agreeing, but it does mean making sure that we understand. And I would say that's a 360 thing, something that I'm hoping you do the same, listening and trying to understand what's being presented. I know I'm very engaged and will continue to be that. It'll be a long time before I see, many months before I see a decision made regarding any of this. You'll hear tonight about that this is not a done deal. I've said that now a couple times already in the first few minutes. I'll say it, I'm sure, many more times tonight. And I want people to at least recognize and believe that that is in fact the case. And it is absolutely where I'm at. Understanding the potential project and the project better is a key part of this. And there's going to be some in-depth conversations, presentation for you. So please stay attuned to that and come up with questions that you think you're not sure about and need more information on. The Kennedy shelter is, as I mentioned previously, is in poor shape. The staff, and we've all been really looking for locations for more than 5 years now. Since the 2016 bond was passed, we've recognized that we need to do something different and likely build a new shelter. And again, staff can talk about what those options are, what they've considered, and what they're still looking at to consider. The bond itself approved to build 4 new shelters around the county. One of them has been built. The other, and obviously one is being considered for the Richmond Highway corridor to replace an existing shelter. And then there's a couple of others that they're looking to build around the county. The shelters themselves house about 50 people at most a night. Sometimes it's less. And again, they're going to go through those details. But there's also some other things that in my mind, we want to make sure that we're considering when we're looking at emergency housing. And that is how it all fits together with a housing first approach, making sure that we give folks stair steps, give them an opportunity for maybe a hand up that first rung to get them into supportive housing or some other kind of housing, and then help them become independent and fully on their own. So those are all key parts of what we're all committed to trying to do. And we have a long way to go yet. And again, looking forward to hearing your comments, your questions, and ultimately meeting you in person over the next few months. Thank you. And I'm going to introduce the first speaker. It's Assistant Fire Chief Tom Arnold. Chief Arnold, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. Just wanted to give you a brief overview of the fire station, both current and proposed, and what the fire and rescue department's looking to get out of this. So as you probably know, the Penndot station is one of our oldest stations, being built back in 1967. It started as one of the original volunteer fire stations. And so given the amount of time that's passed over the course of 50 years since then, we make stations, the apparatus is much larger, and our workforce is much different than what it was back in 1967 when it was probably entirely a male workforce. And so now we face many challenges where we've got apparatus that are not able to fit in the apparatus bays. So that limits the type of apparatus that can be placed at the Penndot station. Certainly with the frontline apparatus that our providers and first responders utilize every day, we are in a good position. But whenever apparatus breaks down, or when companies might need to fill in the Penndot area because Penndot station is other places training or on calls, it can limit our ability to have access for the apparatus to park in the bays within the station. And then, of course, as we try to match the demographics of the county and continually increase our female workforce population, the station was just not built for the male and female numbers that we have now. And so we've got limitations on the number of female that can be assigned to that station, or have to make accommodations whenever there are various numbers of women that are working on a given day. And so that just creates issues that we are trying to rectify through our new construction builds. As with any aging facility, we see lots of issues that come up with the major building systems. Right now, for instance, we had a water leak that FMD, Facilities Management Division, has been able to take care of, but just examples that potentially could create mold issues or things down the road that you all know are the reasons that drove this to be on the bond, and why we have a station that's far beyond the life expectancy for what we want. So with that new station, we really look forward to the lot at Beacon Hill and Route 1, because it continues to provide us good access to the area of the Penndot response area north on Route 1 towards the Alexandria line, where we see that growth and population density. And so with avoiding going down the hill too far south towards the Mount Vernon area, we've got that station in a location where we'll still be able to provide timely response to the whole first due area of Penndot. With that, some of the challenges that we think we were able to solve, and what we look forward to doing with the new station, one's with the designs of the new stations. Now, the contemporary designs allow us for flexibility with our workforce. So as we continue to evolve and meet the demographics of the county and have a more diverse workforce with regard to our male and female population, new stations are designed to really accommodate that much more easily without sacrificing a lot of space due to shared locker rooms that are unisex locker rooms. And then, of course, one of the biggest concerns we have will always be the health and safety of our personnel. And so the new designs really focus on carcinogenic exposure control. And so we're able to build stations that minimize our personnel contact with cancer-causing products. And primarily that would be byproducts of combustion from the diesel exhaust and so forth from the apparatus bay. So the number of times that we can limit the exposure, our personnel have to be in or around the bay near their turnout gear that might have cancer-causing products or the apparatus. We really want to try and focus on that, and we have for several years through our new station designs, and this would be another station that allows us to continue to evolve and meet the needs of our personnel. With that, we'll be able to also decrease our response times by building a station that allows us the flexibility and centrally locates personnel in the station where they can easily access the apparatus base to respond to 911 events. And of course, that time, that call processing time from when the 911 center gets the call until we're able to get out the door is a critical part of that response time. And the quicker we can do that to reach and mitigate emergencies is obviously one of the utmost importance to us, and I'm sure as you as a community. And then, finally, we know that there's questions over how the firefighters feel about the potential of a shelter next door to that. The question came up on Saturday, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that from a leadership standpoint, we are certainly committed to working with our other county agencies to come up with a design, as we have in many instances, to meet all of our needs. And so we are confident that through the planning process, working with our partner agencies, we will be able to come up with a design that meets that. But do we have some firefighters that have concerns over those two collated together? Absolutely. I would not want to mislead you and tell you that wasn't the case. But from Chief Butler, myself, and the other members of our leadership team, we look forward to working with our partners who we partner with probably right now on 5 to 7 different projects, building stations or rebuilding stations throughout the county, and feel that we can equally come up with something that meets everybody's intent and it's good for the community as well. So with that, I will end my part of the presentation and turn it over to Tom Fleetwood.
Thank you, Chief Arnold. I'm Tom Fleetwood, Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development, Fairfax County. And I'm really grateful to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about the continuum of housing affordability in Fairfax County. So first, I'll start with the big picture, that having a healthy housing market affordable to all income levels is critically important. It's important to our economic competitiveness. It's important to the well-being of families living in the county. And it's important to equity and the kind of community that we want to have, that no one is left behind. Based on projected job growth, we've found that we need about 15,000 net new units of housing affordable to households earning 60% of the area median income and below. That's about $75,000 per year for a family of four. I'm proud of the fact that under the leadership of the Board of Supervisors, affordable housing, from emergency housing to supportive housing to senior housing to workforce housing, is a countywide issue. We are actively working to develop new affordable housing communities all over Fairfax County. There are 1,700 new units in our development pipeline in nearly every district of Fairfax County. Our work to develop housing is driven largely by partnerships with our community partners and with our fellow agencies, and the opportunity to potentially develop a suite of county facilities on the Penndot site will be no different. We have some of the finest public safety, public works, and housing agencies at the local level in the nation, and we have excellent partnerships with the capacity to design, execute, and operate a modern, vibrant facility of which we can all be proud. With respect to the emergency housing component of the potential project, I'll ask my colleague, Mr. Tom Barnett, the Deputy Director for Homelessness, to say a few words. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. A 21st century homeless system is different from the shelters you might be familiar with. Today, guests don't just come to a shelter to sleep, eat, and leave the next morning. Modern programs are a vibrant mix of housing and services that are focused on helping people find long-term housing stability. The challenge with the current Kennedy shelter is that the building does not match the services. The current shelter is over 100 years old, far from public transportation and employment opportunities that our guests need. It's not accessible for people with mobility challenges. It's too small to accommodate many modern shelter features. It's cramped. It's a cramped living environment, including bunk beds, which are not appropriate for an aging homeless population or for our post-COVID reality. The building itself is situated in a floodplain that has had multiple electrical and other systems failures, all under historical protection that limits redevelopment. But thanks to voter support for a 2016 bond, we are replacing shelters like Kennedy across the county. We are creating new facilities that are well-designed, welcoming environments with space for effective programs. They provide a wide variety of services on site, like life skill classes, healthcare, help finding jobs and housing, as well as connections to services off-site. They host innovative programs like the county's Operation Stream Shield, which employs people experiencing homelessness to pick up litter and keep Fairfax County streams clean, including several hotspots in the Mount Vernon.
Please enter your access code, followed by
including several hotspots in the Mount Vernon and Lee districts. Last year, the Kennedy Shelter and their outreach team helped over 350 people who are disproportionately Black or African Americans and people with disabilities. The successor to the Kennedy Shelter will not only provide shelter beds, but also add medical respite beds so people without a home who are exiting hospitals with acute needs do not need to return to the streets. And with 20 supportive housing units, it will actually reduce the number of people experiencing homelessness in our community by creating housing for formerly homeless people. It is just the kind of facility that Fairfax County residents deserve. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues from the Department of Public Works.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Christine. My name is Carrie Needham with Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, Building Design and Construction Division. So I'm going to go over a little bit of background in terms of the site evaluation, the existing conditions assessment, and the general timelines associated with both of these projects or both of these county uses we're here to talk about this evening. So the Penndot Fire Station and the Eleanor Kennedy Shelter projects were both approved in a countywide bond referendum vote in the fall of 2015 and the fall of 2016, respectively. And subsequent to the approval of those bond referenda for the two projects, Department of Public Works initiated a condition assessment study for the site and the buildings for both existing facilities. The existing fire station assessment was conducted based on the requirements of the Fire and Rescue Department for a modern upgraded facility. And that study was premised on the expansion and renovation of the existing fire station initially. And as part of that, we at the time recognized the need to identify a site for a temporary fire station in order to be able to maintain 24/7 emergency operations during what we thought at the time was going to be renovation and expansion of the existing station. So during the site search for a temporary fire station location, county staff identified the Hybla Nursery site as a potential location. And in our discussions with the owners of that property, we came to understand that those owners were interested in selling the entire property, which is made up of several parcels. And so as part of that assessment, we realized that the Hybla Valley Nursery site presented a great opportunity to build a brand new replacement fire station. And that presented the benefits of not having to spend the time and the cost to invest in an interim temporary fire station. And as we studied the nursery site a little bit further, we came to recognize that that site has the development capacity to support additional county CIP priority projects. And so concurrent with that process, county staff was also looking at the condition assessment for the current Eleanor Kennedy Shelter facility. And through that assessment, we came to understand some of the things that Tom Barnett mentioned earlier. In particular, the existing facility where the current Eleanor Kennedy Shelter is located is a 103-year-old building that was designed and built as a wastewater pumping station. And that facility was converted into an emergency housing facility in the 1980s. That facility, existing facility, is located within a floodplain, and it's also listed on the Register for Historic Places. That facility is also located on U.S. Army property at Fort Belvoir, owned by the federal government and operated under a lease to Fairfax County. So what we came to see is that the existing structure and the associated site constraints are not conducive to expanding the facility to accommodate the added program needs for a modern emergency shelter and supportive housing that the county seeks. In the 2017 timeframe, Department of Public Works and Environmental Services undertook a site evaluation and a site search for potential locations for a new replacement Kennedy Shelter. And as part of that, we evaluated 12 properties along the Richmond Highway corridor. And those potential emergency shelter sites were evaluated based on the criteria that included site size and configuration to accommodate the shelter program, supportive housing program, and related parking needs, the availability of the property for purchase, the location and the service area where this need is located and it has been identified, the potential for development and the physical site characteristics of the properties, zoning considerations such as allowable land use and density, the availability of utilities, the proximity to public transportation and rapid transit, and the proximity to commercial and retail areas that are conducive to finding employment opportunities for shelter clientele. As we continued to look at the Hybla Valley Nursery site, we also evaluated that site as a potential location for the shelter and supportive housing. And we determined that the nursery site with the fire station on it also met the evaluation criteria for the shelter and would be, or at the time was under contract to the county, would ultimately be owned by the county. We also recognize the site can accommodate a modern new facility for emergency shelter and supportive housing. In addition, combination of the fire station, the shelter and supportive housing also addresses and meets Board of Supervisors priorities and capital improvement program priorities for shared use facilities within the county. Later on in the process, we also came to understand the importance of the 500-foot radius between the shelter location and any school or childcare facility, and the nursery site does meet that criteria with no schools or childcare facilities within 500 feet. Also, in furtherance of the county's Housing First goals, county staff in evaluating the nursery site determined that that site could also present an opportunity to include affordable housing units and an affordable housing component to help build on the continuum of housing options for the lower income households in the county. And we're going to talk a little bit more, some of those things in more detail shortly with Danilo Nunez, our project manager from Public Works, momentarily. In terms of the overall project timeline, looking backwards and forwards, so in December of 2017, our Board of Supervisors voted in concurrence to seek acquisition of the Hyba Valley Nursery property. In March of 2018, the county entered into a contract to purchase the property. And in June 2020, the county closed on that purchase, and we've owned the property since June 2020. I want to stress, as you've heard earlier, that this project still remains in the very initial phases of evaluation. County staff is continuing with our community outreach and engagement process. And as I think you all have heard, in November of 2020, Supervisor Stork formed a Mount Vernon District Advisory Committee. And since that time, county staff has met 6 times on a monthly basis with the advisory committee, and we've provided project background and context and preliminary test fit information to the committee. We've also provided information on and virtual tours of facilities in nearby jurisdictions in the Northern Virginia area that have similar co-located fire station and housing programs located jointly on the same property. In addition to the advisory committee, the county staff has also met with the Mount Vernon Council of Citizens Association in January of this year, the South County Task Force in February of this year, and the Mount Vernon Lee Chamber of Commerce in March of this year. County staff is now engaging in our first full open community meetings and discussion on the subject, the first of which was this past Saturday morning, second of which is this evening, and we'll continue to have these community outreach and engagement meetings going into the future. Future meetings will be identified time and date on our county website, and that information will certainly be disseminated broadly throughout the community. Our county staff will continue our engagement with the community and continue sharing information and seeking feedback on the facility proposed to be located at the nursery site. Once the facility program and site concept are finalized, DPWES's next steps will be to enter into the procurement process to hire an architect and engineering consultant team to design the proposed facility. And that process, again, I want to stress, we have not started that process yet. We have not initiated that consultant selection and contracting process, which is a predecessor to any design work being done. So DPWS projects that the design phase of this project will take approximately 2.5 years, and that 2.5 years includes the architect, engineering, procurement, and contracting process. And that timeline also includes the time required to meet all of our regulatory approvals for building permit, site permit, and a formal zoning evaluation and approval process that'll be required for the site. And again, there would be a formal public hearing process as part of the zoning further into the future with public hearings before the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. After completion of the design documents and regulatory approvals, Public Works would move to construction. And we anticipate that the construction phase for this project would take between 2 and 2.5 years. And that would include the construction bidding and contract procurement process. So in total, from the time that we start the design process, we're talking about 4.5 to 5 years to being able to complete the facility for our customer agencies and those in the community that would use the facilities. And so as part of the process, DPWS's goal is to capture the design-related issues, concerns, and feedback from the community, as well as from our customer agencies, and to make every effort to address these design issues in the project plans. So with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks. I'm going to turn it over to Danilo Nunez, who's going to provide more details on the project background, the site selection, and some preliminary site test fits. Danilo?
Thank you, Carrie. And I'm going to share my screen here and let me know if you're not seeing it. But I'm going to go ahead before I am the last portion of our presentation before we get into the Q&A, but I just wanted to provide one more summary, again, as Carrie was mentioning, of the background, give you some visual of the site, and again, summarize the potential programs that have been introduced earlier. And then we can have a segue there into the questions and answers afterwards. To start off again with the Penndot Fire Station, this station is a few decades old. As Chief Arnold was saying, it was built in 1967 on a 1.2 acre site. The existing station, as you know, has 3 apparatus bays and it's about 15,700 square feet. As Chief Arnold was saying, it is an inefficient layout, as you can imagine, through the decades for a current modern operation, as well as inadequate female living quarters. The current need for the service of the new Penndot Fire Station is about 5 bays and would be about approximately a 20,000 square foot fire station. Typically to how we would approach any of our design and construction projects, we would evaluate for the potential of renovating or replacing the facility. In doing so, we did recognize, again, site constraints of it being in a cul-de-sac. We don't have a direct, perpendicular in and out right to Badoo and Richmond. You're kind of going through Hulvey Terrace. In addition, the cul-de-sac gives you limited area for the circulation of the site and parking. As with all our fire stations we build, when we build a new fire station, we have a need to build a temporary facility to operate while the new one's in construction. Several sites were evaluated, a few of them around the area. And as mentioned already, the Hybla Valley Nursery was chosen because it is a 3.5 acre site. And it's in very close proximity to the existing site, has ample space to allow apparatus to go in and out right into Beacon Hill Road and out to Richmond Highway. In addition, as Carrie mentioned, there was the option to purchase the entire property instead of leasing it. Of course, the site with its size can easily accommodate a new fire station without the need for a temporary facility to be built while the new one is being constructed. In addition, as you know by now, we have also identified the site to have possible co-location with the other facilities that have been talked about today. Here are the possible sites identified for the fire station. There were 4 others, and the Hybla Valley site was ultimately chosen. This led to the purchase of the Hybla Valley Nursery property for the fire station. Again, as mentioned, we recognize the potential for co-location with other county services. It aligns with the county's goal of consolidated services, maximizes development opportunities, and makes efficient use of the site. It holds true to a vision of equity via different forms of housing by having the 2 different housing programs there, and also provides access to Richmond Highway Bus Rapid Transit and also potential employment opportunities for guests staying at the emergency housing. In addition, we would have the opportunity to potentially reuse the existing fire station site. While that use has not been determined yet, that is a potential opportunity we have with the existing Penndot Fire Station. As Carrie mentioned, we were also around the same time evaluating the Eleanor Kennedy shelter. Now, this one was, again, built in 1918. It is not our property. It's leased from the Army at Fort Belvoir. The existing facility is 8,800 square feet, houses 50 beds with a hypothermia trailer. And as you can imagine, even though the repurposing to a shelter in the 1980s, the existing structure, which is over 100 years old, has deteriorating building systems and existing structure constraints. We've identified the need for about 27,000 square feet, which would also have 50 beds as currently, but it would also include 20 permanent supportive housing units. Same with the fire station, we generally go into considering our options to renovate or replace the existing facility. And as was mentioned already before, the existing facility was originally a pumping station, which was later retrofitted to an emergency housing facility. It's within a floodplain and also is on the U.S. Department of Register of Historic Places, which greatly limits the extent to what we could do to add to it or renovate it. There's obvious issues with odors and significant repairs needed and renovation to the existing building systems. In addition, the updated program to include supportive housing units, again, can't be accommodated on the existing site. In addition, the site is leased, again, owned by federal government, and we did evaluate 12 other sites for the Eleanor Kennedy shelter. Here is a list of the 12 sites, and ultimately the 13th one is the Hibla Valley site. That is the one that we were talking about today and ultimately are evaluating now. For context, the site that is in discussion today is off of Beacon Hill Road. You can see the proximity to Route 1 and the Beacon Hill Center to the west of Route 1. To summarize the potential programs that we've introduced today, those would be, again, to summarize the Penndot Fire Station, which would be approximately 20,000 square feet with 5 apparatus bays and 23 bunks for staff. The Emergency and Supportive Housing Program, again, which would be 27,000 square feet with 50 emergency shelter beds and 20 supportive housing units. And lastly, the affordable housing component, which could be approximately 50,000 to 70,000 square feet and approximately 30 to 50 affordable housing units, which could be a combination of 1 to 3 bedroom units. So that last piece, the affordable housing unit, is still, we're still in discussion on how big that would be and how many units exactly that could be. This is a rough footprint of the layout of what could be put at the site. This is with all 3 programs of the fire station, the emergency and supportive housing program, and the affordable housing program. We do know in terms of an infrastructure and design and construction standpoint, there would be many considerations going forward into the land use and to how this would be designed going forward and built. Currently, we are undergoing the advisory committee and also, as you know, reaching out to the community as of now. We do know that going forward, we would have to look into the comprehensive plan, zoning efforts in 2232 that would be required for a facility of this nature, as well as various site plan requirements for permitting. And of course, many have mentioned the need to look into transportation and other impacts in terms of infrastructure to the neighborhood. As Carrie mentioned, once we get the design started, it's about a 5-year process. So we have, to summarize, a tentative schedule in years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 being years. I've kind of put there where we're currently out in the advisory committee and community outreach phase. But again, once we get going with design, that would be about a 5-year process. And with that, that's about it for our presentation portion, and I'll hand it back to Christine to open it for the community questions and answers.
Danilo, thank you. We will go ahead and begin the community Q&A, and we've already gotten about 6 pages of questions. I will remind folks to please keep your comments kind and respectful. There's no need to necessarily call individuals out in the chat. We are, trying to have a dialogue about this. And while Danilo, you were just up, one of the questions that we received is there a central Fairfax County office and point of contact to which we can send written questions, or is everything online generated FAQs? And actually, I'll answer that first. If that is specific to what we're doing here for the meeting, any questions that we can't answer, we will put in the FAQs. If you're asking for a specific point of contact at the county to ask additional questions, Danilo, do you want to answer that?
Is that in terms of could you repeat the question, Christine, please?
Can you give folks the email address for point of contact if they have questions related to the project?
Oh, sure. It is. We'll post it to the chat, and it is available on the website. But I'm sorry, I was on mute. I'll post it on the chat here.
Okay. Great. Carrie, could you please answer what is going to happen to the current and existing Penndot fire station?
Yes, so there's no definite plans for what the ultimate use for the current fire station site would be. If we're able to move the fire station over to the nursery site, that would be the subject of further discussions and an open process and discussion with the community. But there's no firm plan for what that use would be at this time.
All right, I have a follow-up question for you, not related to that. But if this is not a done deal, why has county staff spent time in the last meeting talking about construction and/or the development timeline? Can you please go into that a little more?
So a couple things. We are moving on behalf of our customers in the interest of the county, our board's priorities and our capital improvement program priorities to move towards realizing the design and construction of a new replacement emergency shelter and supportive housing facility and a new fire station, and hopefully contributing to the county goals of additional affordable housing units. So the timelines I outlined for design and construction, those timelines hold true more or less for any site that we develop the facilities on, number one. And number two, from our assessment to date, we believe that the nursery site is the best location based on all of our evaluation for a combined shared use facility that will address the county needs and priorities.
Thank you. I want to mention that online we also have with us today Mount Vernon Police Captain Brian Ruck. And he also has Lieutenant Fred Chambers with him and Master Police Officer Marvin Goodley. So I know we have some public safety questions that we'll be getting to in the meeting, and I just wanted to introduce them and let you all know that they are here as well. A question that we got at the last meeting that we've had several times in this meeting is, and Carrie, this is probably a combination for you and Tom. Can you please provide the data and logic that supports putting these kinds of facilities within a few miles of 3 schools?
Christina, I didn't catch the last part. Within
Within a few miles of 3 schools. What is the data and the logic behind doing this?
Okay, so from a public works perspective, again, we've kind of gone through the site assessment. We've coordinated with preliminarily coordinated with the Department of Planning and Development. And our analytics tell us that we can successfully co-locate all 3 of these uses on this property in terms of engineering, architecture, design. We believe in terms of permits and regulatory requirements. And we go by the regulatory requirements, and the code that governs the issue is that we need to be at least 500 foot from childcare and schools, and this site does meet that requirement. So I can yield to Housing and Community Development if they want to add to that.
Yeah, this is Tom Barnett, Deputy Director, Office to Prevent and End Homelessness. That piece about the 500 feet radius, that is specifically for guests who are sex offenders. If they are a sex offender, then they must reside outside of the 500-foot radius of a playground, schools, that sort of thing. But they are a very small number of the shelter population, just as they are for the general population. The primary reason from the Office to Prevent and End Homelessness's perspective for the site is that it is, as I've said before, the proximity to multiple public transportation options and employment opportunities.
Tom, can you, where does the 500-foot rule come from?
On the county's FAQ is a link to the Virginia State Police. They have FAQs specifically to restrictions for sex offenders.
Okay. Thank you. Actually, this next question is probably for you as well. What percentage of people experiencing homelessness actually have jobs and salaries for which are insufficient to be able to afford rent?
So the percentage of the population experiencing homelessness with income is 59%, according to our latest point in time count, with employment specifically 34%. As you can imagine, most people come to the shelter oftentimes after a lost job or a health crisis. And once they return to employment, they return to housing. So the numbers tend to be lower. Now, in terms of what percentage of them can afford housing, they afford housing through a variety of means. You know, many of them will share housing with roommates, so they may be renting a room, or if their income is sufficient enough, they will rent an apartment on their own, either in Fairfax County or elsewhere. I don't have a number in terms of their income levels generally.
All right, and you also, I have one more question for you. According to HUD Secretary Martha Fudge, her comments are that shelters are not the answer. We do not want to build shelters. Shelters are unsafe as it relates to COVID and unfit for providing people the dignity they deserve. We're hopeful that shelters are going to go away as a consequence of what we are doing today. Can you please explain why the county may disagree with this?
The county's strategies adopted by the community and the board in 2008 do not disagree with that. Shelter within a housing first approach is just a step towards housing. And in a housing first system, you need to have shelter for people, but you need to have more housing than shelter. But shelter is an important part of an effective homeless services system. The pandemic specifically has taught us the lesson of non-congregate sheltering. And so in our future shelter designs, we will provide more room for social distancing.
And Christine, let me just jump in on that broadly, because the board, Tom referenced 2008, which was before my time on the board, but and a lot has changed since 2008, I would say, although I think the core for most housing advocates and others is that they're looking for a housing first approach. And that means you have lots of different options that people can take advantage of that may be best suited for their particular needs, whether it's a group home because they have special needs, whether it's intellectual or developmental, or they have needs with, they just, temporarily lost their job, don't have a place, and this is a temporary option. Or their long-term choices has been to not be housed in some way or other. And again, the county's objective and my objective is to make sure we offer the spectrum. So where that's offered is less important than that we offer it and that we have it available to folks in our community. And that's truly my commitment broadly. This particular process that we're going through is a result of a piece of property that could meet the needs of our fire folks, as well as has other space and other opportunities for co-locating county facilities, which is why ultimately this got brought forward. And in turn, something that I've done in previous potential district or county projects, I appointed an advisory committee to dig into this process. So before you take something like this broadly public, like we're doing now, you have a number of folks, community folks and others, I call them stakeholders, that are part of a group that takes an initial look at this and makes sure that the initial questions and concerns and issues and even locations of other sites can be considered. That's the approach that was taken in the Lorton Community Center. That was also the approach taken with the South County Police Station and Animal Shelter. It's the approach that we've taken clearly with the Beacon Hill property, because this has obviously potential to be a number of things, but the core of what you're hearing is that it is a fire station, and I think the other part of it clearly is housing. What that is what I think this process will help us determine. What might happen with the old fire station property would also, in my mind, be the result or be part of a a community advisory committee that would be engaged with stakeholders as well. So each of these has their own unique process, and each of them has their own unique circumstances, and you need an initial community group that can look at those things, and then you can broadly have those conversations in the communities, which is what we're doing now, and identify whether or not it is what some people think it is, or it needs to be changed or adjusted or modified, whatever. But this engagement, this whole process is elongated. As you could hear earlier, even the initial part of what we're doing has many, many more months to go. And even then it has almost a year's worth of community and public hearings related to either the board or the planning commission. So there's just a number of steps in this, and this is a parcel that's being studied. And I would say it appears from the county's perspective, the lead parcel, but there are at least a couple of other parcels that are being looked at. One of which I would say again, and we've invited the community to identify if there's other parcels that should be looked at. And again, the criteria I know has been gone through, and I would, I guess, urge people to take a look at that criteria and understand that it needs to meet the core of that for it to truly be considered further. But those are all the elements that are essential to ultimately making a decision about, is this the property to do all of these things, or is it a property to do just this and this? And that's this dialogue. We had a meeting Saturday, we have a meeting tonight. We have a whole bunch more questions I know to answer, and we will have, I'm sure, dozens of other meetings, as I said in my opening statement. So to say that this is the end of the process is just plain false. To say that this is the beginning of the process is extremely accurate. And it's a public process of which you all are part of, and I'm sure you'll continue to be part of it as you think appropriate. But looking forward to those dialogues, looking forward to those conversations, looking forward to doing that in person beyond just having a virtual meeting. And I'm sure we'll have more of this conversation as the night goes on, but I'm looking forward to the dialogue and the conversations and the questions that we're getting. Thank you.
Okay. This is a question about family shelters. So this is for the Toms. Could the shelter plans be altered to be family emergency and family transition housing only? Is there any consideration about moving and or having a shelter so close to a high school?
So the primary need for shelter redevelopment is for the Eleanor Kennedy in the South County. We are redeveloping 2 other shelters in Reston and in the Falls Church area. We've already redeveloped a shelter in the Bailey's Crossroads area. The Eleanor Kennedy's is in the 2016 bond that was approved. None of the family shelters in the South County were included. What was the second part of the question?
Is there consideration about, and I know we touched on this a little bit, but these two were together. Is there consideration about moving the plan away for the shelter away from the high school? And we heard this a lot on Saturday as well. Even though you have the 500-foot rule, people are concerned because kids walking to school or going across the street or, in the vicinity of the shelter. So how is something like that addressed?
Sure. So, I mean, the people residing at the shelter are not inherently dangerous. So, their proximity to schools or bus stops is not a safety issue. Again, the focus is on making sure they have access to the same things that everyone has access to. Transportation, jobs, that sort of thing.
This one is probably for Tom Fleetwood and Carrie and Supervisor Stork. Can somebody please address if the county will be doing a risk assessment as part and parcel of the site location process? Is it not disingenuous to ignore the safety concerns of the nearby communities? And can a risk assessment be done if it has not already been completed?
I can take that one again. I mean, risk assessments, again, assume that there is some inherent danger in the people that are residing at the shelter. Risk assessments are not part of the redevelopment process. We examine the criteria and the needs for the facilities and engage in these kinds of dialogues.
I'll just add, if I may, Christine, that, you know, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that our partnerships between the Department of Housing and our public safety agencies are extremely strong. We also have very high expectations with respect to the operations of these facilities. So we are very committed to ensuring public safety through our partnerships with our fellow agencies to the extent that it's necessary. Again, our guests at our shelters are not inherently dangerous.
And I wanted to, I want to respond a little bit more to that, but I'd first like to hear from Captain Rock or Lieutenant Chambers, and maybe they could just at least kind of address in general their experience or observation. They're from my perspective, they're the safety and security experts, and obviously their assessment of this broadly is I think what we all want to know and want to understand, and maybe that'll at least help to address some of the concern I hear raised about that issue.
Thank you, Supervisor Stork. I'll just talk briefly. I'll turn it over to Master Police Officer Marvin Goodley here in just a second to talk about his experience with the shelters. He's been at the Malvern Station for over 20 years now, but essentially the calls for service the police department receives at the shelters are essentially normally located within the shelters themselves. So we do get calls for service there, and we, especially the Eleanor Kennedy shelter, the staff will call, and we do get calls for service to go there. But those calls for service are generally contained to the shelter itself. And again, I'll let Master Police Officer Goodley address some of the different events that he's handled and dealt with over the years. Again, he's the crime prevention officer at the station and has been here a long time. So I'll turn it over to Marvin.
Good evening, everyone. So a lot of the calls we actually go to at the shelter are actually within the property, on the property of the shelter. They can vary vastly from just a service call to a medical assistance to lost property or someone who's just being disorderly with the staff. A lot of it, like I say, is enclosed in the shelter. We have no data that say exactly what happens in the shelter floods out into the community. Since the years I've been here, we've dealt with quite a few things down there. Just like anywhere else, whenever you have a large group of people together, you're going to have something that's going to happen, and we deal with it. But and the times I've been here, those things have not flooded out into the community. So if we get called for a disorderly person at the shelter, we go to the shelter, we deal with it, then whatever we have to deal with, then we go from there. It's really contained within that property.
Yeah, thank you, Marvin. And that's just an important piece of discussion, because we did share some numbers during the last meeting, and some folks are on again. And I'll just give you an example. So in 2019, we went to a grand total of 225 calls for service at the Eleanor Kennedy shelter. In 2020, it was definitely less because of COVID and everything going on, but it was 178 calls for service. So essentially, a lot of those calls for service are disorderly conducts or trespassing for people that go to the shelter that get disorderly, that are causing problems for the people that are just trying to stay there, and staff will call about those type of things. But again, largely those calls are contained to the shelter property itself, and many times inside the shelter. So we go and we address that as needed.
Well, the question, Captain Rock, I don't know if you can shed any light on this, is quote unquote a risk assessment. That seems to me more of a security issue, but I'm open to at least exploring what that means, and maybe I would at least could ask you to see if you have any sense of that, and then we can I can obviously talk to Tom Fleetwood and others about what, if anything, we can do to at least clarify, first and foremost, understand what that might mean, and then clarify what that could mean to the community. If you could, I don't know if there's anything you can add to that, what as to your sense of or assessment of what that might mean.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the risk assessment, when you start looking up and down the Route 1 corridor, if anybody on the call here goes to the police department's public facing website, you will see our crime data, our GIS map that's updated consistently with calls for service and crimes that occur throughout the county. And you can also just zoom in and see the Mount Vernon district. So to give you an accurate, to say that if we put a shelter in a particular location, is that going to then pose a risk to the surrounding communities? That's a very difficult assessment to put together. It's just the Eleanor Kennedy shelter, for example, again, as Master Police Officer Goodley said earlier, the calls for service that we get there occur on the shelter property. The apartment complex across the street, we don't have calls that we know of related to the shelter in those locations. So to say we're going to try to put together a risk assessment for the surrounding community for a building that doesn't exist yet, we just don't have the data to do that, essentially, if that makes sense.
And so it gets back to the core. We have some data about the Kennedy shelter, of which it has its own uniqueness that may or may not apply to any new location. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say? And then the particular things you've identified are things that have occurred within the shelter, and are your word is they've not spilled over the community. I guess if there's anything else you can think of, I'll stop with this, and we can circle back around to see if there's any other way we can look at this. I'm more than happy to do that if somebody in the community wants to try to clarify further what they're seeking and what we can try to do to give a better safety assessment. I think we're more than willing to take a look at that. But I think the point that was made earlier that that Tom made about the occupants or the guests at the shelter, I think also would remain true, is that they're not, what we understand, inherently more dangerous than anyone else in the community. And we all know that's our vigilance, if you will, is to ensure that we are monitoring and anticipating where issues could occur. And I know, again, Captain Ruck and his staff are trying to respond to that. And that's obviously key part of what I do as Mount Vernon supervisor. And Captain Ruck and I meet regularly about what's going on in the district and how we can respond to things that maybe would have some impact on the safety, security, or overall crime rate. And the overall crime rate in Mount Vernon has been going down. That's the good news for a number of years. So we'll hopefully keep that trend going. Thank you.
And just to clarify too, Supervisor Stork, the calls for service data that I'm putting up there as well, that is not necessarily always criminal activity. That's when the police are called to a location, whether that be for a service or something non-criminal in nature. And I'll have to pull the data, so don't quote me on this number, but I think approximately last year in the Mount Vernon district, we had 20,000 calls for service throughout the district. And again, that's why I brought up the data portal. You can pull that up and actually see the number of calls for service that happen at Mount Vernon Shopping Center and all up and down the Route 1 corridor. So just to kind of put it in perspective related to the shelter.
Thank you, Captain.
So somewhat related to that, there's been some follow-up in the chat, but we've also gotten this question a few times. If a person is caught with alcohol and or drugs at the shelter, it was discussed at the last meeting that they are asked to leave. Where are they expected to go, and will they be, will they be allowed to roam into the community and neighborhood streets? How are they relocated?
This is Tom Barnett again. So to be clear, we do not ask people to leave because they may come in to the shelter intoxicated on drugs or alcohol. The use of illegal or possession of illegal drugs and alcohol on the site is not allowed. Residents have the opportunity while they're at the facility to get treatment for substance use disorders during their stay. As a safety precaution, all residents are subject to breathalyzers and urinalysis if they present signs or symptoms of alcohol and drug use. And this is primarily to ensure that anyone who's under the influence of drugs or alcohol, so we can provide the appropriate oversight and supervision to make sure their health and safety is good throughout their stay. The only time that someone will be asked to leave the shelter, unrelated to drugs or alcohol, but any sort of behavior that threatens staff, other guests, volunteers, then they'll be asked to leave.
Okay. Related to the public safety question, I would like to see if we can get a response from Fire Chief Arnold and the EMS response and your interactions at the Eleanor Kennedy shelter, kind of similar to what Captain Ruck discussed from the police's perspective.
Sure, certainly.
Thank
So over the course of calendar year 2019 and 20, we averaged around 175 calls there, specifically 191 in 2019 and 151 in 2020. Probably 85 to 90% of the incidents that we respond to there are for medical emergencies. And so people within the shelter having medical emergencies, chest pains, difficulty breathing, so forth. We've responded to a few overdoses, assaults, and so forth, but that is by far the minority amount of calls we respond to. A couple fire alarms, but when looking at the data, 85 to 90% of the events that we do respond to there are for sick person calls.
Okay, thank you for that. Could you also talk a little bit about, there are folks that have had conversations with, firefighters at the current station that don't want co-location, and what your thoughts are about that and how their concerns for safety are being addressed?
Oh, sure, absolutely. That's absolutely true. When this first came about, we had several personnel, primarily at the Penndot station that worked there, that expressed concern over that. Members of our leadership team went down and met with each of the 3 shifts assigned there to discuss what was projected to be on the site, take their feedback, and come back. And of course, we have members of our International Association of Firefighters, Local 2068, and personnel from the Penndot station on the work group that Supervisor Stork has established to be able to air their concerns over this process. Primarily from the leadership standpoint, and their concern would be that their safety could be in jeopardy with potential for personnel, for people from the shelter to be outside the fire station. And so really where we're at with that is we believe that collectively working with the county, we could come up with a design that would minimize that potential, and we would be able to design a station and complex around there that would minimize the access to where the fire station is located, and we would be able to have a fire station that's in a safe and secure area, and our personnel would not be at any risk. And so we think that with those designs and then taking that back to our personnel, we would be able to calm their concerns and be able to show them what a design would look like when we would get to that point, and be able to meet our needs, but then also share what the overall county goal is.
So,
Christine, if you're going to move on, I just wanted to make a comment because first off, for those of you who may not know in the community, the Penndot fire station, the personnel there are extraordinary members of our community. Extraordinary meaning that they have donated and contributed not only their time, but their space and so many other resources to almost every effort that addresses or supports our neediest in our community, from coat drives and books and so forth to toys for kids and backpacks and so on. So this is, I want to make sure that everybody understands that I understand, appreciate the sensitivity and the concern the firefighters and EMTs might have there. And I think their questions are reasonable, and I would expect that they would be addressed as part of this process. In fact, in my mind, the purpose of the stakeholder group is to find ways to get satisfaction from all the different groups. get as close to that as possible. And again, given the history and the tradition of the Penndot Fire Station, they have been extraordinary members and contributors to our community for a long time. So I want to just make sure everybody understands they're coming from a good place, and we, of course, all of us want to make sure that we continue to work with them and support them in their efforts to keep us all safe.
Supervisor Stork, I do have it's not related to fire, but I do have a question for you that keeps popping up in the chat. What kind of assurances will you give us that drugs and alcohol will not be tolerated in this facility and then into our neighborhood?
To me, that's a very straightforward, unequivocal, clear that it's unacceptable. And we have a number of steps that I would expect would be taken. But if they're not taken, I can assure you at the board level, they would be addressed either directly one-to-one with county staff, or if necessary or appropriate, given that I need board support for it, then I would go to the board through a board matter and get the support that I needed. But the bottom line is it's not acceptable, period. Inside or outside the shelter, not acceptable. We have, and that's part of the procurement process, is that county staff, is not me, it's the county staff, has a procurement process where they enable people to bid for the services. Those bids then they're accepted, have to conform to a contract. The contract then in turn is monitored by county staff, and the conditions and criteria that have to be monitored. If something isn't done properly, then I fully expect county staff to enforce it. If they don't, then I can tell you this, and I have done this, and a lot of my staff has been involved with this, and you personally, Christine, have been involved with raising issues with county staff on different situations that were not being handled properly, and we would absolutely address that until it was in conformance with our agreements and contracts. Additionally, we have Coley, a police force that responds to issues that community members may raise or may be raised on site, but I can tell you this, have been raised multiple times by this office and myself personally. Captain Ruck, you can address some of those broadly if you'd like, whether they be regarding homelessness, camping, and staying on property that doesn't belong to them, or it's inappropriate for them to be on, and addressing that and getting them a place to stay that's not in private property or not in inappropriate public locations, or mental health issues that are ongoing that are not getting fully met. And we're coming back, and we're actually, our office facilitates resolution of many of those things because they're that important to the community and they're that critical to people feeling, safe and comfortable in their own home and in their own communities.
Captain Ruck, would the Fairfax County Police Department consider a remote station or an officer posted at the new site?
I would say we definitely wouldn't put a remote station there. Obviously, there's a lot of costs associated with that. I think that the Board of Supervisors would have to facilitate additional money to add a location there for us. But the police station is right down the road. And the one thing that Supervisor Stork and I talked about referenced the actual location of this. The Eleanor Kennedy shelter is sort of right between the Franconia and Mount Vernon districts. It's right on the far south end of the Mount Vernon district. This site is located right in the center of the district, essentially as the police department boundaries go. So our officers are constantly up and down the road there. And as Supervisor Stork said, we have a great relationship with the shelter and the Office of Preventing and Homelessness. So when we get a complaint about someone who is either sleeping on the side of the road, sleeping in a tent. We had a gentleman that was at Route 1 and Old Richmond Highway, or Mount Vernon Memorial Highway, sleeping on the side of the road on Penndot property. And we worked hand in hand with Supervisor Stork's office and the Office to Prevent Homelessness to get him moved before finally we had to arrest him because he just didn't want to leave. So we will do that. We'll do what we have to do to make sure that people are not sleeping in public spaces or on private property. And that's just a call. If you call us, we're there. We're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So You call the non-emergency line. If it's an emergency, call 911 and an officer will be there.
Thank you.
And Christine, that's not just a community interest, that's a safety interest for that individual. And in this particular location, we were deeply concerned because of its proximity to a major road. And so it's not something that we take lightly. And we also expect that we'll have, if you will, the options of housing that we can in turn provide and offer to the individuals. Without that, it makes it very difficult for us to enforce something when we don't have options that are really appropriate to that individual. And I'm not here to say that we have all those options. The state and some of the decisions that they've made have not provided us with those options, and particularly at the intermediate level. And we spend a lot of time talking to Community Service Board, our own Adult Protective Services, clearly the police and Office to Prevent Homelessness. I mean, those are all key parts of the team that go in, that are involved in trying to address, and in fact, ultimately will address these. If other options are foreclosed, we will bring and ask the police to be engaged and hopefully do it properly.
We've gotten quite a few questions related to transportation. And so, Carrie, this is probably best for your group. This project calls for 108 to 148 parking spaces to exit onto a 2-lane road. Why has a study not been performed on this? I'm a transportation planner and this causes me some concern. When will the transportation assessment be conducted?
So it's a great question. And as I said earlier, and we've said all evening, this project is at the very, very initial stages. The county, Public Works, has not taken the steps yet to hire a consultant team. As part of the process, if we move forward with planning and design for this facility at this site, the traffic analysis will be part of the regulatory process. It is a hard and fast element of the zoning approval process that would be required. We're just not at that step yet, at that stage yet, so it will be conducted.
Okay, thank you. Carrie, can you also address there were residents that asked for a FOIA related to the county's decision and considerations in selecting a site? Those documents, the response was that there were no documents. Can you please address that?
Yes. So that question came up Saturday morning as well. So when the FOIA came into the county, the FOIA office directed the FOIA request to the Department of Planning and Development, and Department of Planning and Development knows very little, if anything, about the project, which at this stage is being managed by the agencies on this call: Public Works, Housing and Community Development. And so Planning and Development responded that they didn't have any information. And it was late last week, Thursday or Friday, that the issue was brought to Public Works' attention. And we are actively working on compiling that information. And I've had some emails with members of the community. And by the end of this week, we expect to have that information ready to respond to the FOIA.
And you may know the answer to this one. Has anyone from the county actually confirmed that the daycare across the proposed site is actually out of business?
Yes, we have.
Can somebody please, and this is for Tom, can you please describe the services and programming that will be provided at the shelter? How will this benefit those who stay at the shelter? Will the community have an opportunity to participate?
Yes, okay. The primary service is obviously shelter and meeting people's basic physiological needs, food and water and warmth and clothing, but the services go much more beyond that. It's really all services are oriented towards returning people to stable housing. And so that includes case management services, housing location services, employment services, connections to physical and mental health care, and referrals to services offsite, and help getting to those appointments where they have services that can't be met, needs that can't be met on site. And so all of those things help people stay well and return to housing as quickly as possible. The role of the community, as it has been for, since when the first shelter opened in Fairfax County, some 50 years ago, as volunteers and donors, they provide in-kind and cash support, as well as their own time to provide meals, to teach classes and run other group activities. They've done many different things, but during the winter is probably the most impressive, when they host additional shelter space in their houses of worship around the county. So you have volunteers from churches, mosques, and synagogues running shelters alongside our contracted service providers like New Hope Housing. And these are volunteers of all ages that will stay there overnight and with our guests and help take care of them.
Tom, are residents allowed to use the shelter's address to get an ID or driver's license in order to find jobs?
Certainly, absolutely, yes. One of the great services we provide is just simply a place for like an address.
Thank you.
Christine, before you go on, I want to kind of tag on a little bit to Tom's point, because this is what I think it oftentimes is not understood in the community, is that we've had emergency housing throughout the community for decades, and we've had just a tremendous amount of volunteer and support. I mean, the Kennedy shelter alone was started by Eunice Kennedy and many others, and I can't do probably the justice to the story itself, but she and others saw the need to try to support and address folks who were homeless and clearly in need of assistance. United Community was started in this broader community to do and support folks who had severe needs. These are all in the late 60s, early to mid 70s. Good Shepherd Housing, I was president of Good Shepherd Housing and the board. It started because one individual saw a family devastated by a fire and knew that they needed a house, they needed a home. And he worked with other people to create, in essence, Good Shepherd Housing to do that. New Hope Housing, another corridor, if you will, community that came about because folks cared. And then you add to that all the churches and mosques that clearly are part of our network right now. And I think Rising Hope is one of the most obvious one, and Carrie's work on that for decades. And I have to put a plug in here for now for Carrie, because he's really given his life to our community to care for the less fortunate and the neediest in our community. And he's getting ready to retire after decades of support. I think it's sometime in June is maybe the formal official date, but I want people to recognize that folks have been here for us to care for those who were most in need. The Methodist Church, I mean, there's, again, the list is long. And even in the past year, we've had homeless shelters in our hotels, in our communities. And I think most people probably don't know that that's what's going on there, because they're well run, they're well maintained, and the guests are acting appropriately and consistently with the community's expectations and standards. So that's a key part of why this is important for us to do wherever it is we do it. But it's something that we don't have a choice about. We have to replace the Kennedy shelter. The question is where and how. And obviously, if we can do that soon, it would make a difference for everybody involved. But and that's what this process is. We're in the early stages of this process, but that's truly where we are. There's there's no done deal. There's no, it has to be here. There's just a lot of criteria and staff work that is really essential to even get to the point that we can have this conversation. And that's what we've been doing tonight. And again, that's what we'll be doing over the next really many months. And I'll be doing in probably dozens of meetings on.
This one is for Tom Barnett. Many homeless people have mental health issues. How do you address those?
Sure. So as it's been mentioned, we have essential county partners in other departments. One of those departments in the county is the Community Services Board, which is the public behavioral health provider. They provide treatment and detoxification services to Fairfax County residents, including people who are staying at our shelters that need them. So they can provide low cost or free treatment and therapy and care. We also use similar privately run facilities such as the Neighborhood Health low-income clinic that's right around the corner from the proposed site, right there on Richmond Highway near Beacon Hill.
Do you know what percentage of people that stay at the Eleanor Kennedy shelter have mental health issues?
So the number that I have most available at hand is from our point in time count in 2020 of single adults. And the percentage is 28% with a severe mental illness, 8% with substance use disorders. There's a lot of other information available there online as well.
Okay. I also want to go back to the question earlier about people that may use and or have drugs and alcohol with them or on them in the shelter. Can you be more explicit about what their care is, and if they are asked to leave, where do they go? And I think the question there is you know, are they released into the neighborhood?
Sure. So much like the question about mental health care, the connection with the Community Services Board is essential, so that if people need treatment and want treatment, they can go to treatment. Or if they're so heavily intoxicated, they need detoxification services, they can go there as well. These are all facilities operated by the Community Services Board. So those would be where we would prefer to get someone connected to if they're actively, well, if they have a substance use disorder.
And I'm not sure if this is you or if this is Tom Fleetwood, but can one of you all talk about where the locations are for the other single homeless shelters in the county, and specifically the types of neighborhoods that they're located in?
Sure. So I'll start from top to bottom. There's 3 shelters for single adults. One is the Embry Rucker shelter in Reston, which is just north of the Reston Town Center. It's next door to a library, daycare center, and apartments. Then there's the Bailey Shelter and Supportive Housing, which is our newest facility that opened in 2019. It is at the crossroads of Bailey's Crossroads, and it's a commercial industrial area, but residential also just over 500 feet away. The Kennedy Shelter, as we've discussed, is there at the gates for Belvoir, across the street from residential, brand new apartments as well.
And we keep getting this same question, so I'll ask it. Why are you not updating and renovating the current shelter? Why are you building a new facility?
Sure. So the facility itself has limitations based on its historical protection. The public works staff could provide a lot more details there. So, but from the agency that would use it, it's challenging for the guests to get to and from housing appointments, jobs, and other appointments up and down Richmond Highway and beyond, because it's so far south and most of them have to rely on public transportation.
And Christine, before you go on, I'm confident, and I can't speak for the New Hope, but I think in general, I would urge everybody to visit the site. I think in this case, a visit's worth a million words. Go and take a look, and you're going to see what we all see and why we are all here talking about not renovating the existing site, even though I'm not even sure that's possible, but why it's essential that we build a new shelter emergency housing. And in addition to that, have the continuum of care, if you will, the supportive housing, affordable and other kinds of housing that can provide stepping stones for folks that are connected to this.
Tom Fleetwood, did you ask anything else? Or did you want to add anything else to that?
No, I simply wanted to note that, again, the challenges inherent in renovating the Kennedy shelter are exactly as Supervisor Stork outlined, and certainly would encourage people to visit it to check out the conditions.
So we still seem to have a lot of questions about the type of housing and whether it's for single adults, what kind of single adults. Will gender be considered as part of that when they come in? Where do the families go, and where do families with children go? Tom, if you could maybe give a little bit more information about that.
Sure. So Tom Barnett, so specific to the emergency housing or shelter and the supportive housing, these are for households with only adults. These are all people over the age of 18. We have people up into their 70s, 80s, and even 90s staying in our shelters. And so they are men and women over the age of 18. That's the population. For the generally affordable units that are proposed to be added, I don't know if we've gotten to that level of detail. Tom Fleetwood may have more information.
So with Tom Fleetwood, with respect to the potential additional housing, it's not yet been determined what population that might serve, whether it be singles or families. We're just as all of us have stressed, we're really at the beginning of the beginning on this, and we've just no decision's been made on that.
Supervisor Stork, what specific commitments will the county make to ensure that the Springbank community is front and center on use of the old fire station, since it is located within our community? How do you plan to address this?
Mm-hmm. I think the core of it is we have a stakeholder group. And again, I mentioned this, I don't know if it was at the very beginning or just sometime during the conversation we've been having tonight, but every single project, every single proposed project where it's gotten to a level that it's serious and it's likely to move forward, I've done what no other supervisor has done. I mean, you can look around the county, nobody has consistently done this. I've done it because I believe in community engagement. I believe in making sure that we have stakeholders that are nearby, as well as stakeholders who have an interest that are part of this group. So as with the Beacon Hill Advisory Committee, which Christine has been ably leading on behalf of my office, which is what I've done in each of the previous ones, we've brought in people who represent the surrounding communities, as well as folks who are likely to be part of any type of housing or any type of service that might be offered there. So that engagement can happen early on when we can have those kind of discussions. We can also identify maybe what works, what doesn't work, and in the end up with a project that is generally supported by all that are involved. That's the process. That's what I do. That's what I would do for the existing Penndot station site, Now, whether or not this existing group gets rolled over into that, I'm not sure, because it would be some length of time before that happened, but there clearly would be a community and a stakeholder advisory group, of which the Spring Bank community would clearly be part of that.
Tom Barnett, is the community housing proposed for profit, or will it be a county-run facility?
The proposed successor to the Kennedy Shelter is going to be a county-owned facility, and as with the current shelter, operated by a not-for-profit organization under contract with Fairfax County.
I'll just add that any affordable housing on the site would be operated by the Housing Authority under contract with a third-party management company.
Okay, thank you. When we talk about a continuum of housing, we've talked about the co-location with an emergency shelter. There have also been discussions at looking at models that include supportive, affordable, and perhaps workforce housing at this site. Can you please explain why that model is being considered and what the requirements would be for people in each of those scenarios?
So,
go ahead.
Sorry, I'll start, Tom. This is Tom Fleetwood. I think what we're looking at with respect to this site is the opportunity to deliver a suite of county facilities that delivers a range of housing. Generally, when we speak about workforce housing, we talk about families and households that are earning 60 to 80% of the area median income. But really, all of the families and individuals that participate in our housing programs, unless they're elderly or disabled, the vast majority of them are working. So they are all critical parts of our workforce. I would ask Tom to speak to the eligibility and entry into supportive housing and what sort of the distinction of supportive housing from affordable and workforce housing. Tom?
Sure. So supportive housing is specifically targeted to the percentage of our population that have disabilities, and because of that, their income is low, so that they cannot afford housing in the private market. And so it combines both affordable housing and supportive services to help keep them housed. The eligibility for the shelter or emergency housing is nothing more than experiencing homelessness without any other place to go.
We've heard a lot at the last meeting and at this meeting about property values. And does the county have research that shows what the impact of bringing in a shelter will do on property values in the neighborhood? I'm not sure who's best to answer that question.
This is Tom Barnett again. There is research around the country, and it's really mixed in terms of what the results say, depending on the city that it's done in. So it's been inconclusive, but I will point to the properties that are adjacent to the current shelters, and you can see that property values have gone up in each of those neighborhoods.
I would only add to that, Christine, that there was a recent study by Zillow that looked at 20 of the largest metropolitan areas in the country with respect to property values and the delivery of affordable housing using the low-income housing tax credit program, and showed no discernible impact on the delivery of that housing on property values.
Christine, let me address that more broadly. I mean, there's no doubt that in Fairfax County, our property values have been going up. So that alone is, I think, a function of we have a broadly desirable place to live and move, and for kids to go to school and so on. So I would expect that trend to continue. I'm not here to comment specifically what happens next door or across the street. I don't have that knowledge and really can't comment on it, but broadly in in this case, the Beacon Hill community, the embark process, the comprehensive plan changes that we made about 3 years ago have identified that this area, this little Beacon Hill, has unlimited what they call floor area ratio, which means you can build essentially as tall a building as you want, as long as you can support that with the other services around it. So, and that's probably more specific to the shopping center that's there, but the shopping center is owned by one landlord. So this area broadly is, I'm sure, attractive to developers, and with the addition of the bus rapid transit system and ultimately Metro, which would also have a stop here at Beacon, over time, the property in this area, I would think, would absolutely exceed the averages of the area, given its the potential and the future density that can be here right along the highway. So I'm not here to make a sales pitch or anything else. I'm just here to talk about broadly over the next 10, 20, 30 years. This community is designed based upon the process that we followed a few years ago that we had innumerable public engagements about, and the bus rapid transit stop, which will be literally across the street, and the future Metro, which will be, again, further down the road, but still future Metro stop. You can look around and see what those impacts have been in other places. So long term, I think it's positive. I recognize that those concerns are real. I don't have any specifics for the immediate properties around there. And if they exist, I'm happy to share them. So if somebody has something that we can share with others, I'm more than happy to take a look at it and share it.
Tom, can you talk about what the county's plan is for homeless folks when they enter a shelter? Is the county's goal to get them into permanent housing? Is this a gateway to get them into a more permanent living situation? And, you know, what process does the county have currently to move people from homeless shelters into workforce housing?
Sure. So it starts with safety in the shelter, but then the connection to services, both on-site and off-site, to help them find and secure housing. So they may be provided some temporary rental assistance for people with longer term needs. They can get longer term rental assistance and long-term supportive services. It's really based on their individual household's needs. And of course, the resources that are available at the time. But it's all focused on getting them back into housing as quickly as possible, and not just for them, but for everyone who is experiencing homelessness. The strategies that the community adopted and implemented in 2008 reduced homelessness by almost half in 10 years. And so those strategies have been proven effective, not just here in Fairfax County, but across the country and communities that adopted those same strategies.
I would say some communities have been far more successful than others. And I think, again, in Fairfax County, we've been successful. That's not to say that we don't have more to do, because we clearly do. And that's, I think, part of what this whole engagement about is finding the right mix of housing and how to do that and where to do that in the community. Those are absolutely key parts of it. We have inadequate housing for folks who frankly make the least amount of money or have disabilities or other challenges. And that's what, group homes that we've looked at and need to. That's what obviously supportive housing and senior housing, those are all key parts of that mix. And we're looking for ways to fund those. And that's not just true of Mount Vernon District or Lee District and Richmond Highway Corridor. That's true around the county. And the county has made, and I know Tom Fleetwood discussed that earlier, but the county has made a focus to add affordable housing all around the county, not just where we've traditionally had more of it, which is along the Richmond Highway Corridor. And we're looking to ensure I'm looking to ensure that dispersion takes place, as well as we leave no one behind, that people who live here now can continue to live here. And that's kind of the minimum standard. And even more importantly, that they have the ability to reach their full potential, to thrive and essentially achieve their objectives. I think we can help that, but in the end, it's a collaboration between us and the individual. To some degree, we can't work any harder than the individual, but we can at least provide opportunities for them to grow and improve.
Supervisor Stork, this one's for you. Could you publicly offer a tour of the shelter?
Oh, I'd be happy to, sure. I would obviously need to work that out with New Hope Housing and do it at a time that's protective of the identities of the individuals who may be using the service, because they have a right to privacy as well. But I'd be more than happy to work out a time and put out a community-wide notice and be there and talk to folks and chat with folks about it. So yeah, of course.
Okay. Another thing I would add to that, if someone from our team could please post the link in the chat. We did, due to COVID, the advisory team was looking to do tours of the Eleanor Kennedy shelter and also the Bailey shelter, and we weren't able to do that in person. And so Channel 16 from Fairfax County went out and actually did video tours of the facilities. And so I'll ask that if you guys could please post that in the chat. So if you're interested of getting an idea of what it looks like, you at least get a first impression of what those look like. This one is for Tom Barnett. If adults staying in the shelters pose no risks, why aren't children allowed in the same shelter?
It's not that children aren't allowed. The facility has to be designed for the use. So a family with children will have a room with multiple beds to accommodate the parents and their children. A shelter for adults only, typically single adults, they currently are sleeping in bunk beds, but the idea is that they have more separate, unique space to themselves. So there's different designs. Obviously, children also require play areas, areas to study, and have other needs that adults don't.
How does the co-location of this fit with the One Fairfax policy?
I saw that. I'm glad you brought that up. So the population who are using the shelter is disproportionately African American or Black, over half, despite the fact that the general population in Fairfax County is only 10% Black or African American. And so putting the shelter in a place that is central to employment opportunities and public transportation rather than in the farther reaches of the county connects them to opportunities that they didn't have connections to before. The challenge of putting disproportionately Black or African American community in an area with fewer opportunities perpetuates many of the challenges that already exist, such as lack of access to housing, jobs, etc.
All right, I have another one for you. The county plan to address homelessness was done in 2008. When does the county plan to update this plan? Why wouldn't this plan be updated before building new shelters, especially since any shelter plan today wouldn't be in operation for 5+ years?
Sure. So there's the 10-year plan that ended in 2018 was then reviewed in 2019 and presented to the Board of Supervisors as lessons learned. In 2020, a proposed countywide strategic plan that includes homelessness strategies and metrics was presented to the Board of Supervisors. Adoption was ultimately deferred due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And is to be reviewed again this year, and any final edits and revisions are to be made before approval again. At the same time, our local community's partnership to prevent and end homelessness is reforming a governance structure since our office to prevent and end homelessness merged with the Department of Housing and Community Development. So a new governance structure that will have a new body that updates the strategic plan to prevent and end homelessness frequently is being created now and is expected to be done before the end of this calendar year.
I'll also note that the community also engaged in a community-wide housing strategic planning process over the last 2 to 3 years, and identified, as I stated in my opening remarks, a need for 15,000 additional units affordable to households at 60% of median income and below, including people with extremely low incomes. And it's important to recognize that one of the primary causes of homelessness in any community is the lack of affordable housing. So I thought it was important to also mention that. Thank you.
Tom, has the county considered co-locating a homeless shelter with any of the faith communities?
There's been discussions in years past about co-location of temporary shelters with the faith community. It didn't end up being utilized, but certainly.
In the ongoing planning process, is the county planning to involve currently or formerly homeless people?
At one of the recent community meetings, there was 2 guests, one current and one former of the Kennedy shelter, available and shared their experience. This was the South County Task Force and Ventures and Community meeting, facilitated by New Hope Housing. One shared as a graduate of the program his success in being housed, and the other had actually just obtained employment in Fairfax County through the Operation Stream Shield program that I mentioned. And since that meeting a few weeks ago, he's actually been housed as well. But yes, when we come to the design of the facility, including consumers of homeless services, will be very important in getting their feedback.
Since the current shelter is located in Lorton on Fort Belvoir, what do you plan to do with the homeless in Lorton, Newington, and Fort Belvoir?
So the idea is that anyone who's in the South County can utilize the Kennedy shelter or other shelters in the county. So that is very important. We also engage in what's called street outreach for people that are unsheltered or not yet in shelter, where a team, including the New Hope Housing outreach worker, as well as physical and mental health care workers, will also, a nurse and mental health worker will also go out and engage individuals who are unsheltered, wherever they are in the South County, to help to connect them to shelter and other services.
All right. Were the demographics looked at for the community that you are proposing to put this into and the surrounding neighborhoods? I'm not exactly sure the question. Are you placing this in a Black and Hispanic neighborhood?
So Christine, when we did our site search, we were not looking at demographics. We were looking at land areas, character of the land, the character of the zoning, and the physical ability to support the facilities that we're talking about. First, the fire station was first, and then when we purchased 3.5 acres, we realized that that site had additional capacity that can potentially support multiple CIP priorities, but no, demographics were not a consideration. Zoning characteristics were a significant consideration.
Can you explain a little bit about the public hearing process, Carrie, and where the public hearings take place?
So when any project gets to the point of what we call land use entitlements, and in this case, anything more than a fire station on this site would require a rezoning process. So that is an action recommended by the Planning Commission and approved by the Board of Supervisors ultimately. And so in that process, Department of Public Works and Environmental Services would be the applicant, and we'd be somewhere in the order of 35 to 50% into our design. So we had some level of specifics around the design for the facility on the site and all the site characteristics to provide to the Department of Planning and Development. We would continue community outreach as this type of outreach we're having here. But through the regulatory process, there is a formal public hearing process before the Planning Commission that's advertised and convened by the Planning Commission, and subsequent to that, similar public hearing opportunity in a formal sense before the Board of Supervisors before rezoning would be approved. And of course, that rezoning would be required to be approved in order for the project to move forward into final design and construction.
Supervisor Stork, we were also asked if you would be willing to consider doing a public meeting at the site.
Yes. Yes. I think the question, just to give you a chance to look at your notes, the question is how soon or when, and I think that's a function of, frankly, the governor, but I think we ought to be able to do that sometime in the next couple of months. I'll leave it broad, but I think that ought to be able to be done in the next couple of months.
It seems like your search for alternative sites for the shelter was limited to the Route 1 corridor. Why didn't the search encompass a broader geographic area? Yep, that's the question, sorry.
Sure. So I can start with Tom Barnett. I mean, this is where the people experiencing homelessness are in up and down the Route 1 corridor. This is where they travel and where they get other services at the South County building, at the health clinics and drop-in centers, et cetera. And so that's where we targeted the location where people are.
So we have some questions related to the meetings and doing them in different languages, and specifically in Spanish. And one of the things that came out of the meeting on Saturday and that we've heard a little bit tonight is how can we do that? And so we've been talking internally that we are going to look to provide those options, either to have a Spanish only presentation that we can do in person, and or we would translate the first 30 minutes of the meeting in Spanish and then have staff available to do Q&A like we are now in Spanish as well. So that will be coming up. I don't know, Supervisor Stork, if you want to add anything to that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not aware of any other languages that we need to be attuned to, but I'm happy to, if somebody can alert us to a community that needs translation support, then please, by all means, do so. We know that, I mean, again, my experience on the school board, I know that Bucknell has one of the highest percentages of Latinx or Spanish-speaking families in frankly, Fairfax County. So it's a natural thing for us to do, an appropriate thing for us to do. And I know we, again, as Christine, as you mentioned, we've had those internal conversations, and we're going to work that out and definitely do something, I would say, in the next couple months at the most. So we'll, I'm sure, put something out to anybody who's given us their email address. If you've signed up for our newsletter, then you'll for sure get it. If you're not sure how to do that or what that is, it's we have an e-letter that we send out routinely typically comes out at least 2 or 3 times a month with different kinds of events that's going on. And if you email us, then we capture that email address, we put it into our newsletter distribution, and you'll get that sent out from us anytime we send out information to the community. So if you don't want us to do that when you send us your email address, just tell us that, and we won't put it on there. But in general, that's how we've tried to grow. We have probably, we have over 7,000 members of the community that are part of that system. And again, if you have some other ways that we can contact or engage with your community, I know that many of our communities have listservs, whether they be community associations or HOAs, et cetera. And we send it to one person, I'm sure it gets distributed to far more. We're happy to do it that way. If you don't want to share that specifically, we can do it and share it that way.
One other thing that I'll mention that we talked a little bit about at the beginning of the meeting, there is now a huge billboard sign out front at the location on Beacon Hill Road. There is some information about the project as well as a QR code that you can scan it. And on the right-hand side, it's open. As we continue to have community meetings, we will not only send it out electronically, but we will also post signs there on the site. Additional community meetings will be scheduled and hosted, some in person, some virtual, and we will continue to do that. I do have one last question that I want to ask, and then Supervisor Stork will wrap this up for us. And this is probably a mix of many departments, but I know this is especially important to the residents at Spring Bank. What specific steps will the county take to prevent shelter residents from camping on the Fairchild property? How will this be addressed? This has been a long-standing issue.
This is Tom Barnett. I'll go ahead and get a start. There are multiple responses from Fairfax County staff in response to an unsheltered individual who may be camping. The human services side obviously responds to engage the individual, build the trust, and hope to convince them to utilize the shelter beds that are available, as well as services such as mental health care and other types of basic needs services. And then, of course, the public safety departments with the police department also would engage individuals, and perhaps someone from the police department would like to explain their involvement. I could probably speak to it, and that the property owners obviously can enforce their property rights. So if it's a private owner, then they do not need to allow someone to camp at the site. They can post and tell the individual they're trespassing, post a no trespassing sign, and ask the police to enforce that. So that's always an option.
Yeah, the goal for the police department too, just to add on to that, Tom, is just we work with them so that we are not just immediately going to an arrest, and that's something that we really want to try to avoid at all costs. So trying to get the services and trying to make sure we run through the process for us, till we eventually, we can have the person removed from whatever the location is, and then ultimately, their belongings. Many times they say a lot of stuff was donated, as was the gentleman at Mount Vernon Highway and Richmond Highway. He didn't want any of the stuff that was there, so VDOT ended up getting rid of it. So there's a lot of factors that we need to make sure that, when it comes down to the property and dealing with folks, we really do everything we can before we make an arrest.
Thank you, Captain Rock.
I'll just add a little bit. I've been personally involved with previous incidents at the Fairchild property, and we thankfully, because of the relationship and the kind of the cooperation and support we've had from the community, they've identified when that's when that's happening. And we then have sent out lots of different people to ultimately address those folks who are staying there. It's never easy. It always takes more time than I think it should, but in the end, we've been very successful at removing people who are on the property that don't belong there. And again, we'll continue to do that because we have options for folks, but those options need to be available. And we need to have it appealing to people too, because as you might expect, some of the individuals that are in these situations are very clear about what they want and don't want. And yes, they will continue to reside outdoors, even when we all would recognize that it's not safe for them to do so. So there's always an incredibly difficult balance that occurs, but we will, and I know that the county will engage and ultimately, if they have to, enforce those limitations of not camping and staying there. So that's, in the end, that's what we will do, but we hopefully make it a last resort. And I know Captain Ruck, in our many conversations, it's really always a last resort for them. And for me, it should always be a last resort as well, because we've got great staff to work with folks to do that. I'm going to just wrap up here. We've had, I think we've had another good conversation. I know we didn't get, I'm confident we didn't get to all the questions that were asked. And I understand that it's not for anything more than, as you can see, we spent 90 minutes tonight, more than 90 minutes tonight answering questions. We spent more than 90 minutes on Saturday, and there will be plenty more opportunities to ask and get questions answered. The best way to initially do that is to give us your questions in writing, and we can post those to our FAQs, our frequently asked questions. So this process, again, to repeat, we are in the early stage of the process. We recognize that particularly the emergency housing, the shelter portion of this is a difficult conversation for us and for the community as to what it means and where this could be going. And again, I'll repeat what I've said before. This is a proposal that's been brought forward because county staff has looked for other options and they've not found better options so far. And we're having this conversation because there's an element of reality to it that needs to get addressed. We have a stakeholder group, we have key staff people. We need to be asking and looking and making sure that we've not missed anything along the way, as well as we need to do what we've asked everybody else to do, which is county staff. We've all looked for other properties, other locations that could meet the conditions that county staff have brought up. If you have something that you think has been overlooked or you at least would like to get some kind of response for, then please let us know that as well. And we will, at least county staff will engage and provide us with responses. And I'll look forward to those as well. Again, it's not a done deal. We're all still engaged and listening. We have plenty more time. We have many more months of engagement that we're going to be doing on this. And ultimately we have, probably regardless of location, but ultimately there will be public hearings, whether it's to the Planning Commission or to the Board of Supervisors. Those are likely to be outcomes as well. What we all universally recognize, and that's why I've encouraged everybody here to go take a look at the Kennedy shelter and look at what's there now. We all universally recognize that we can't continue to provide services in a building that's more than 100 years old, that was never designed for this, can't be expanded, has historic protections, et cetera, can't provide the other services. So we know we have to move and find another location. And that's what we're all talking and looking and working towards right now. So again, continue to stay involved. I absolutely appreciate your being part of the engagement tonight. I particularly want to thank my staff, your staff, the Mount Vernon District staff for all their hard work in this. Christine in particular has been in the middle of this, working with all of you and ensuring that all voices get heard and that all questions get answered, and that we have a process that people feel engaged and listened and heard, and ultimately can produce the best outcome we can to provide only the services that we need to be providing along Richmond Highway Corridor and in Mount Vernon District generally. So again, thank you very much for being here tonight. We will advise you of other meetings and other locations that will be having those. If you're not familiar with how you'll get that, just send us an email. We'll put you on our email list. It's the best way to be sure that you're aware of the process and the many more months we have to go in this dialogue, this conversation. So again, thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.